Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about some of the most difficult campaigns in Total War, Warhammer 3, Immortal, Empires. Now a couple of considerations when I decided to make this list. First off, it can't just be a situation of a difficult early game, because a difficult early game is just that, a difficult early game. It has to be a harder campaign throughout, not just the first few couple of turns. That disqualifies a lot of the campaigns that quite a few people might consider difficult, like say Mederic or Fraud on Clean, because Fraud does have a difficult campaign early on. But once you do get the ball rolling, and you can within a couple of turns, you end up dominating the campaign map. That applies to Mederic, that applies to Fraud. So it has to be something with at least some degree of longevity to that difficulty. On top of that, it just can't be a situation where you have a really bad Legendary Lord or a really bad race. Because that's not really a difficult campaign, that just means the race is bad. It's like, say, playing World of Warcraft, and people are complaining that raid boss is difficult when your raid composition is bad, your talent builds are bad, and half the people aren't using optimal gear or consumables. That just means your setup is bad. That doesn't mean that the actual boss, the actual challenge, is that high. So with that, those kind of things in mind, at number 5, it would be Lord Skrolk of the Skaven. So Skrolk is not necessarily a really great Legendary Lord, but he's still a Skaven Legendary Lord. And he actually has a good amount of potential in his campaign, far more so than people might think. His Plague mechanic, it can be especially deadly now that Creative Assembly has changed how it works. And Skaven, of course, are a phenomenally good race in the game, to be sure on that subject. But here's the problems you're going to encounter in this campaign that make it an especially brutal campaign. Now, you do start in Lustria. Many campaigns that start in Lustria do suffer from the movement situation. Skaven don't have that problem. But the problems you do have, you start a war with the Sentinels of Time, or the Southern Sentinels, who have a provincial capital over here with the garrison. And that's your early game situation. What makes this worse is you also have the Cult of Sotek right to the south of you, that are going to be an absolute nightmare. The Cult of Sotek might as well rename themselves the Skaven Slayers. Because dealing with these guys as Skaven is an absolute nightmare in a campaign. The kind of benefits Tenuin gives against Skaven specifically as a lord are very substantial. It feels like fighting an endgame crisis from the first few turns of your campaign. So that is a difficult start, but it's not that part which makes this campaign especially challenging. It is also the fact that to the south you have Axiatl, who is very likely going to attack you once you do defeat the Cult of Sotek. And you can't really ignore the Cult of Sotek, because he'll start spamming a lot of armies against you, and you don't really have the time to waste in this campaign. But that obviously will put you in close proximity to Axiatl, who might just flat out ignore dealing with Kairos or the Minor Siege faction over here, and just full-on invade Lustria to kill you. So that is one problem on your southern flank. But then there's another issue, which is Gorak to the north. Now, he doesn't have Lord Croak when you're not playing him, but Gorak still has a bunch of very durable infantry. He's an absolute nightmare to deal with in a battle, and he is almost certainly going to declare war on you. Then you have Luthor Harkon. You might laugh at the idea of dealing with the Vampire Coast, but when you're dealing with the Vampire Coast, plus Itza, plus Axiatl, things start getting a lot more complicated. And even if you were to deal with that, your only quote-unquote ally is Rakarth. You could argue Skulltaker to some extent, but you then have the Holy Trinity of Jan Bo, Marcus Wolfhart, and Alberic, who are almost all certainly going to declare war on you one way or another. And even if you deal with all of those, you end up having to deal with Mazdamundi. After Mazdamundi has conquered a good amount of territory over here in the north and starts spamming stacks against you. So obviously this list is designed for legendary difficulty, so you gotta consider the kind of AI modifiers on that difficulty, but regardless of what you're doing in this campaign, you have numerous foes. Skaven in particular are the kind of race that are widely hated across the campaign map. The vast majority of races in a campaign have a dislike of Skaven one way or another, because they're freaking Skaven. And while you could rely on Rakarth to a certain extent to help you out, you're going to have to do the heavy lifting in this campaign. So You're in a situation where you're being attacked from the north, being pressured from the north, being pressured from the south at the same time, and that is going to go on for a fair amount of time. And if you're dreaming of relying on Skulltaker to deal with Gorok, well, I would say that's a nice fantasy. It can happen, but I wouldn't rely on it happening in a campaign. More often than not, what I found playing this campaign again and again is that you're probably going to have to deal with all of these issues on your own. And that is an absolute nightmare of a campaign situation. At number 4, it is Alith Anar of the High Elves. Now, usually speaking, it can be hard to consider any High Elven campaign as being especially difficult. There are a number of reasons, the baseline units of Spearmen and Archers just being really good, having Administrator Archmages and Mages available in the campaign, that is all really, really powerful. But there's still a bunch of issues that you will be confronting in an Alith Anar campaign that put anything that, say, someone like Emmerich has to deal with, or many other campaigns, to shame. So Alith Anar's campaign, compared to, say, Emmerich's campaign, is easier early on. So the first 10, 20 turns or so can be a complete breeze. It's what happens after that where things become an absolute nightmare of a campaign where you can win pretty strongly, but you're also sitting on a house of cards that is potentially going to topple in a particular time very, very quickly. Like over here, for instance, Be'lakor probably may or may not destroy the monoliths, or he may be trying to run away from the Sisters of Twilight who are chasing him down. That's just an example. Then we have Malekith, who's defeated his enemies. He's only at war with the Demon Prince because of Malice Darkblade, and he might just start declaring war on me. And if he's not declaring war on me, I'm going to declare war on him. So there are those kind of situations, because the beginning part of the campaign is easy, but then you start having these factions, be it Be'lakor, Malekith, Helebron, and Silostra to deal with. And you will have some fairly difficult battles. To be sure, Alith Anar does have a great deal of combat power, because every army he has stock and underway stances available to him. But you are going to be stretched very thin to be dealing with these kind of issues. And that already would be pretty brutal enough in a campaign. But then you also got to consider the fact that you can't just ignore Ulthuan. 1, because you have an objective at the Shrine of Cain. 2, chances are, because if you ignore Ulthuan, things might not necessarily end up going so well over there for the factions in Ulthuan. So you have an incentive to also deal with Ulthuan, but you kind of don't want to abandon your starting position either. You do gain a lot of power, but you do have a lot of enemies to deal with. Those enemies won't necessarily attack you very quickly, though they can. Get into a band engagement, lose a good amount of strength in a battle, like take too many casualties, and it might just be a buffet for everyone surrounding you. Like almost everyone that hates you may declare war against you at once. And chances are they're going to declare war against you anyway, and that is obviously going to be a fairly substantial issue to deal with during the course of your campaign. So you do have those problems from the beginning, but those problems get worsened by the fact that regardless of which direction you're expanding, if you're going into Ulthuan, you start meeting Morathi, you meet the Dread Fleet, you have to deal with Slaanesh. If you're going against Malekith and Helebron, congrats, you just met Valkia and Sigvald. And in this case, I declared war on Sigvald to get money from Helebron, but it does start becoming that kind of problem of a campaign where the more you conquer, the more you deal with enemies, the more enemies you encounter, and the more enemies you encounter, the more thin you're going to be stretched trying to deal with all of those kind of issues in a campaign. That is the comparison between Emmerich and Alith Anar. Like, Emmerich can control his corner of the campaign map, and that is, by the way, a clear difference between a hard campaign and an easier campaign. When you can control the campaign situation fairly reliably, that is not necessarily a hard campaign. It's when things can go very quickly to hell and back, that is difficult. Like, by the way, in this case, I actually leave this Dark Elf faction alive that starts in Karankar, And then Be'lakor shows up and conquers all of them, forcing me to go to war against him because, well, guess what? Who he's coming after right once he's done with him. Well, to be fair, in this case, he went to war with the sisters. But it is that kind of situation that you're going to have to dealing with. You don't necessarily have the best resource unless you get really lucky with some of these objectives, but certainly High Elves and this campaign do need an update, like having the randomization of objectives and the way they work can be pretty frustrating to deal with in a campaign, so I think that could be better. But all the same, this is one of the most brutal campaigns, even if on a surface level you might think, oh, Ambush Master, powerful range units, powerful range capability on a factional level. To be sure, all of that does end up working very well in this campaign, but you gotta remember the kind of limitations that you do have and the kind of chessboard that is available to you in this campaign and what you're dealing with. Because dealing with Malekith, Helibron, Be'lakor, Silostra, Tarax is a joke, but still, it is something you're going to have to deal with. And it's not like you can just sneeze your way for Tarax. You need to send a full army to deal with him. So having to deal with all those threats and then getting more threats as a reward, yeah, that is a pretty brutal campaign situation to be dealing with over here. The hardest High Elven campaign that isn't called Techless, and Techless is hard because, well, the terrain of his campaign is really bad, and he's a really bad Legendary Lord. Alith Anar is an exceptionally powerful Legendary Lord, but he still has a very brutal campaign. At number 3, we have Drazoath the Ashen. Cast Dwarves are a fairly strong race. But you see, here's the thing with Drazoath compared to Zhaitan or Ostrogoth. If you're playing Ostrogoth, you have the most secure starting position of the Cast Dwarves, because you have a province with 3 settlements close enough to each other that you can easily defend over here. And almost no one's going to attack you from the north, and from the south you do have choke points to defend against Grimgor, to defend against the Dwarves. You can also deal with Grimgor quickly. In Zhaitan's campaign, it is that nightmare that you are forced to expand east, but also have Grimgor in your backside. But you can at least deal with Grimgor quickly enough in a campaign. That is the unique feature of Drazoath's situation. It's not that he has powerful enemies, though he certainly has them, but he's not in a situation where he can deal with any of the nightmare scenarios in his campaign quickly enough. So those nightmare scenarios start escalating, and you end up fighting a war, not just on one front or 2 fronts, but maybe 3 or 4 fronts at once. Given the limitations of Cast Dwarf capacity, as well as the inherent weaknesses of their economy, in the sense that if you lose a couple of key settlements, you might as well quit the campaign, Drazoath is in a nightmare situation. Because, to begin with, you have Tretch, you have Emmerich. Both of them hate you, both of them are almost certainly going to declare war on you. You can avoid war with Tretch for a while, or completely if you want to, but your victory condition does require you to wipe him out, so your relationship with him was always going to be limited by design. That's just the start. You have a good situation potentially with Kugath, but you also have Gorst to deal with. Greasus is, funnily enough, your best friend in a campaign, and, well, let's just say he still has a -40 aversion against you. Then, of course, you have Cathay to the east, which is the problem. So that's just your starting dynamic. But what makes this situation far worse and far more brutal is what happens later on. Because suppose you deal with Tretch and you deal with Emmerich quickly enough. You certainly have the capability of doing so, especially because of the Dreadquake prototype Mega Mortar over here. That is good, that works. But here's the issue. You're never going to be in a situation where you can deal with Grimgor very quickly, nor can you deal with Forgrim or Ungrim quickly enough in a campaign. And even if Ungrim or Forgrim or both of them were to lose to, say, Skarsnik or Azak, which can happen, well, guess what? Azak and Skarsnik also despise you because you're a filthy chaos dwarf. So you're hated by dwarves, you're hated by greenskins, very few factions like you. Outside of, obviously, the chaos factions. And even the chaos factions are like, yeah, these guys are despicable. So you end up in a lot of wars with multiple people. And there is no worse situation in a campaign when you've got the doom stacks of the dwarves coming in from the west, which can happen, and Grimgor coming in from the east. In a better case scenario, you can have a situation where one of these threats is distracted by something else, like say Forgrim ends up in a long war with Queek, and Skarsnik and gets distracted or gets wiped out, and then Skarsnik gets distracted by other issues. But then you still have to deal with one theater, and the problem is you might devote a lot of resources against Grimgor, but that just leaves time and opportunity for your enemies out west to grow stronger. So you have to deal with these situations roughly at the same time, one way or another, at least delaying one theater while dealing with another one. Case in point, one campaign that I recently showcased on this channel when I was talking about the Chaos Dwarves as a whole, I was playing Drazoath, I was conquering the dwarves, I was moving in the Empire, and I thought to myself, okay, I'll just confederate Zarnagrund and then deal with Grimgor with Zarnagrund. Well, Grimgor ended up conquering Zaytan and Astrogoth, so I had to literally send as many armies as quickly as possible over there before he literally conquered Zarnagrund on his own. That is the kind of situation, and that was before I confederate the Zarnagrund. That is the kind of dynamic you have in this campaign. It's not just Emmerich and Tretch, it is Grimgor, Forgrim, and Ungrim that are the problem in this campaign. It is Cafe, it is Queek, and you might have to deal with all of these guys at once. Never mind that you're also incentivized at the same time to conquer Kugath, because the Dragon Isles can be an enormously powerful economic center for the Chaos Dwarf. So you're dealing with territory that's fairly far apart. You're right in the center between many legendary lords that are very powerful, and unlike you, who is limited by economy, by unit caps, they don't have a care in the world. Even worse than that is there's a possibility, a strong one, that Kislev might just end up winning this situation and start invading the Darklands en masse. It may or may not happen, but it is the kind of campaign where at least one thing, will go very, very badly for you. In a sense, some faction, one way or another, is going to become a mega threat and game level threat, and you're going to have to deal with that. You are exceptionally fortunate if you're playing a Drazoath campaign and everything goes in your favor. Like Grimgor doesn't become really powerful, or dwarves don't become really powerful, or Skarsnik doesn't become really powerful, or Queek doesn't decide to mass invade you, or Gorbat doesn't decide to mass invade you, because let's not ignore the fact that Gorbat also exists right now. So you have to be incredibly fortunate to have get every single card to fall in your favor in this campaign, and that is what makes it brutal. Because then you'll start dealing with stack after stack after stack just coming towards you, and you're going to be spread thin trying to defend your territory against those threats. There are ways to make it work, sure, various cheese tactics, various mechanics that you can use in your favor. But again, Chaos Dwarves are a strong race. They have some balance issues in terms of campaign pacing, but no one can dispute that their armies are incredible. But it says a lot that you have those kind of powerful armies, and you're afraid of what's coming towards you when you're playing this campaign. It makes it an exceptional campaign, exceptionally brutal as a campaign to play. The fact that it's not number one, well, should give you a clue of what's coming up on this list. At number 2 is Emperor Karl Franz of the Empire. Now, out of the 3 Imperial campaigns, be it Elspeth, Gelt, and Karl Franz is the only one that actually has a challenging campaign. Elspeth ends up dominating Sylvania and might just conquer the Empire along the way because, schematics. Gelt's campaign situation is a question of how much bullshit you can get away with before it becomes too much, but certainly it's not so much of a challenge as opposed to maneuvering around the campaign map to achieve the maximum effect. Karl Franz's campaign, well, Karl Franz can get tier 5 outdoor very quickly in his campaign. This is a modded campaign. This has a mod enabled called Heirs of Sigmar, which brings a bunch of benefits and those kind of things. But all the same, this campaign can allow you to achieve an enormous level of power very, very quickly during the course of it. Especially because you can use the Noble trait in a campaign. Noble gives you that construction time. Though unlike the High Elves, it's not construction cost. So you're having to manage all these different fronts. And oh my, are there a lot of fronts in this kind of campaign. because you're not just playing Karl Franz, you're playing the entire Empire. So you have to worry about the Electrocounts, whether or not they're going to be wiped out. You might think that has been made easier with the beta patch. I can assure you that for all the kind of benefits of the Electrocounts surviving a bit longer, you're still in a nightmare scenario over here. So, you've got Khazrak, who's your initial enemy. Keep in mind, starting at war with the Legendary Lord is already a rare enough situation. Then you have Festus. Then you have the Black Pit Orcs. Then you have Vlad, the Changeling. Those are just the initial obvious issues. You have Draika, who might just defeat any one of your armies on her own and scatter them to the winds. But then you've got Kemler, you've got Grom, you've got Ikkiklaw potentially. You've got Be'lakor, you've got Norska. Regardless of where you expand in this campaign, and regardless of which territory you're dealing with in this campaign, you will be facing more and more threats. And even when you're winning on one front, you are almost certainly losing on another or having to worry about another front. Because somewhere, somehow, someone is losing in the Empire one way or another. I mean, inherently the Empire is meant to be devastated. Like, you can play this campaign as Karl Franz and dominate Khazrak, get Marienburg, deal with Kemler, secure Bretonnia, etc. But then Clan Mulder may just conquer Kislev and start launching massive doom stacks against you all along the eastern frontier of the Empire. Or Azak can win. Or Vlad shows up with 7 stacks in the Reichland, and Elspeth's just sitting back, chilling, doing absolutely nothing in her entire campaign. She does have a tendency of doing that. Like Karl Franz, when he's played by the AI, he gets shit done. Elspeth, when she's played by the AI, she's on a vacation. She's just resting. She's just having the time of her life. Don't wake her up. Seriously. Says a lot about Elspeth's AI. So you do have that dynamic, similar to Drazoath, where you have a bunch of enemies on different flanks that are pretty powerful in their own right. Sure, not on the level of Gremgor, to be sure, but powerful enough. And you are also in the dynamic situation where you can't just ignore what's happening in the rest of the Empire. You cannot ignore the Electrocounts and their fate. Sure, maybe half of them do get wiped out, but you do have to devote those resources in this campaign, and you're incentivized to do so because you can guarantee confederations with them. So you have that specific dynamic in a campaign. And you don't necessarily have the most powerful armies to deal with those kind of issues because Karl Franz's campaign mechanics and Legendary Lore mechanics are focused more on empire building as opposed to having really powerful armies. He does have benefits with Electrocount State Troopers, but he also has the hardest time to unlock them, so the potential from a military standpoint is there, but it's more so aimed at getting a lot of campaign power available to him and flexibility in a campaign. But that requires a lot of work, effort, investment in this campaign to make it work. And early on, well, welcome to the Hunger Games. That is the Empire. Welcome to the real Thunderdome. It says a lot about this campaign that there's plenty of campaigns in the Empire area that are complete breeze, right? You play Elspeth's campaign, you play Draika's campaign to an extent, you play Festus. Hell, you can even talk about Khazrak or Vlad. They can be easy enough. But the moment you start playing Karl Franz, it's partly the starting position and the dilemmas the starting position creates, as well as the fact that, you know, Imperial Authority and then the fealty system force you to do things that other campaigns don't have to tackle. And that makes this campaign especially brutal and especially difficult. I would recommend, however, that people begin with this campaign to an extent, because on lower difficulties it's obviously far more forgiving. I'm making this list on Legendary, but if you're starting new, I think this campaign is a great learning tool because it will force you to deal with those different fronts, those different situations. This is an exceptionally hard campaign on numerous levels, but it is also a great deal of fun. It used to be one of the worst campaigns, and now it's one of the best campaigns in the game as a whole. Now, at number 1 is Malakai Makaisson of the Dwarves. What makes this campaign pretty brutal is that despite the fact Malakai is obviously a really powerful Legendary Lord, and he can get a bunch of free units through the adventures, all that kind of stuff. And for some people, it's going to be like, oh, you can get a bunch of free thunder barges. How could you consider this campaign difficult? Because by the time you get those thunder barges, you're probably neck deep in it, in the situation that you're dealing with during the course of this campaign. So let's take a look at the situation that he has to deal with, just from the beginning, and understand that it only gets worse from there. So first off, you've got Throt, you've got Norska, you've got Azazel. Those are the immediate concerns. Immediate. You might deal with the Vermintide. You might have Throt sending army after army or sneaking behind you to attack some of your undefended settlements. You might have a powerful army of Azazel showing up at you. You might have all of Norska unifying very quickly in this campaign and marching on your doorstep. You are the front line of defense for Kislev. To be sure, you do have an ally in Kislev, quote unquote, but relying on the AI to do anything for you is... herding cats is a generous way of saying it. But those are just the immediate concerns in this campaign. Then you have Epidemius, the Demon Prince, Archeon, and Arbol. To be sure, Boris Ursus may or may not win against Archeon, but that is a coin flip, and again, relying on the AI to do anything is very questionable. Chances are you're probably going to have to help Boris Ursus to an extent or another, and the way you help him is by drawing attention to yourself, getting involved in a war with Archeon as quickly as possible so Archeon is invading you as opposed to wiping out Boris Ursus. That should give you an idea of how useful the AI is as a partner when you're literally having to pick a fight with their natural enemy so they don't get wiped out. And Archeon recently got buffed in the campaign AI beta. Arbol in particular is a difficult foe to deal with because Arbol has a bunch of benefits for mortal units, and he starts with the ability of recruiting those mortal units. So he starts with the ability of getting Chaos Warriors of Khorne in his campaign from turn 1, and he can start getting Chosen. He can start getting Wrathmongers if he makes the Capital Immortal settlement. I think that's something CA needs to change with Khorne. But regardless, unlike the Warriors of Chaos factions, who can have really powerful units but are limited because they can't handle the Warband recruitment system, Arbol does not have that limitation. He flat out will recruit Chaos Warriors, Chosen, Chaos Knights, Bloodletters, Exalted Bloodletters, Cult Cannons, you name it, he will probably get it and throw it against you. And that is the beginning situation of your campaign. Of course, you then have Astrogoth, and you also have other issues to tackle. But these are not just the reasons this campaign is number 1. They are one of the primary reasons this campaign is number 1, having to deal with all of these issues, but it's also because when you're playing a dwarf campaign, you're not just playing one dwarf campaign in a certain secluded area of the campaign map. No, you're playing the Dwarf Empire, because you have that guarantee of a confederation with other dwarf legendary lords. So when you're playing a Malakai campaign, you also have to deal with Thorgrim's issues, Ungrim's issues, Belagar's issues, Forik's issues, Grombrindal's issues. And to some extent or another, you do have the luxury, of course, in every dwarf campaign of picking and choosing which one of these you're going to care about. The reason, dwarves in general would be very high up on this list, but the reason I put Malakai at the top of this list for dwarves is, while he does definitely have a great deal of campaign power, though, to be blunt about it, I think Grombrindal's campaign is far easier than Malakai. He has an enormous amount of campaign power as well, and where it actually matters in building an empire, not just having individually powerful armies, though Grombrindal still has that going for him. But it's not just that situation, it's also the dilemmas that you get presented with during the course of any dwarf campaign with regards to confederations. So there's a lot of different things that can go wrong. So if you're viewing the campaign, I can just turtle up and crack a Drakh and just slaughter my enemies. Fair enough, I suppose you can do that. You can do that in any campaign. But if you're out there looking to achieve your objectives within a reasonable time frame, which in the case of dwarves requires legendary grudges, and requires you to deal with the other issues of other dwarf legendary lords, then things start becoming far more brutal. Because you might get lucky and Thorgrim ends up dominating this portion of the campaign map, or he might be wiped out, and then you have to go there, reclaim Karazakrak from Skarsink or Gorbad or Queek. Yes, that does happen with Queek. and then having to deal with those enemies on this front while you're still managing this vast territory over here and dealing with the enemies that are coming against you in this direction. That is what makes this campaign hard. You're surrounded by enemies, they will come at you, but then you have a campaign dynamic which pushes you, incentivizes you to go out there, confederate other factions, and actually fight for their territory as well. Those are your literal campaign objectives. It's not like just some minor affair here. Your short campaign victory condition requires you to do 4 legendary battles. Fair enough, that's easy enough. But your long campaign victory conditions requires you to do those 7 legendary battles and wipe out Grimgor, the servants of the Conclave, and the Legion of Asgore. So your objective is to get here. Think of that. You start here. Your objective is to reach this point. But really, the real objective in any dwarf campaign are these kind of legendary grudges that you want to deal with and the benefits that you get from them. So on top of the multitude of powerful foes you have on hand, you also have those other issues to deal with. So there's a lot of things to do, and none of them are particularly easy. Like, I understand, like, if you're playing on a lower difficulty, I can understand the situation, why you might think this is a cakewalk, sure, but when you're playing on Legendary and you've got Archeon showing up with a stack, then Arbol showing up with 3 stacks, which you almost certainly will, and the potential that Frot can end up dominating this map on his, this part of the map on his own, then the potential issue of Azag as well to contend with, Norsky, sure, Norsky is cannon fodder for Malakai, but less so when they're showing up with 6 damn stacks. Because between Wulfric and Trog, you might have that situation at hand. Or you might have invasions from Epidemius, or Alice Darkblade might start wanting to destroy you. Or Epidemius, who's certainly a joke of a legendary lord. But all of these issues do require a significant amount of force to deal with, and that's just your starting position. When you hand in Belagar, Grumbrindle, Forgrim, Ungrim, Forik, it gets a hell lot more complicated very, very quickly. And again, you can play an entire dwarf campaign and not care about those other issues. But if you view the campaign from perspective, I'm playing the dwarves as a whole, and I do want to care about all their issues at the same time, you can start understanding why this campaign can be exceptionally brutal, for all the power that is available in it. Questine, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.